All right. So we're at that time to start, so let's get started. Just to set some expectations, we won't be talking today about luggage on iPads in education. So if you came for that, we're going to skip that topic. Did I get a clap? All right. We probably have no reason to bring up VPP and Apple IDs here either. So you can feel free to bring them up. I don't know how it dovetails in. But I am here today to share a little bit about what I know about the topic of creating Mac OS X installation packages. I'm Jeremy Reichman, and I've been packaging and repackaging software for the Mac since the days of Mac OS 8 and 9. Not that that's relevant anymore, but that was back when third-party software was required to do this. I'm sure installer packages are just what you wanted to hear about on the last day of the conference, first session. So I think that's why I was placed here early in the day to liven some things up here. So let's show some enthusiasm. I'm going to have a dean scream here somewhere, aren't I? To test your enthusiasm, I will occasionally ask for a show of hands. So get ready. My goal here today is to show you how to use the open source tool, the Luggage, to create installation packages on Mac OS X. The Luggage is not magic, and it may not be the solution for every package. I hope, though, that I will provide you with enough to get started and some examples that will help you create the kinds of packages that you may need in your environments, whether you're deploying as a sysadmin or deploying to actual end users who will double-click the packages. And if you can take what you learned from this session and contribute back to the Luggage project in some way, that's even better. A lot of people who got started with it have contributed small bits here and there. So oddly enough, one of my first big repackaging jobs involved Java. This was back on Mac OS Classic, and Java on the Mac was always behind then, and we struggled to get it installed for the enterprise when we needed it, and now the tables have turned. It's still behind, it's no longer installed by default again, and the runtime gets disabled if you don't use it. So before we go any farther, though, I'll make sure you see the URL for the slides and other links in the talk if you want it. I had this up a moment ago, but I also wanted to see my website in really big type again. So that's nice to see. Mac OS X, unlike classic Mac OS of yesteryear, has always had its own installation packages. No third-party tools are required for installations because Apple provides installer.app and the built-in package formats. Packages consist of source files with a precise description of where the files go, as well as their ownership and permissions. They have metadata, like the package version, whether or not the installation requires a reboot, and whether files can be relocated or not. Scripts that check the system and disk requirements are also included, and also some scripts that run before or after installation. And that's pretty much it for what packages do. So you may wonder more about the packages that you download or create. Suspicious Package is a quick look plugin that lets you find out more about them. Who knows about quick look here? Hopefully every hand. No, not quite. I love quick look. In Leopard or later, you press the space bar while you have a file selected in the Finder and certain other apps like Outlook 2011, and you can see a preview of those files. It's really handy. But for packages, you just get this. It's not really all that useful. With Suspicious Package installed, though, you do get more detail. You start with this overview. You can expand to show the installation scripts, like this Perl script. Or you can delve down to see where files and folders from your package payload will end up. So I find that this is an invaluable review tool when I'm creating packages, and I like to bring it up right up front. It allows you to quickly check your luggage output, or the output of any packaging tool that you're using, or any packages that you get from a third party. So Apple includes the installer app and has defined the package formats we use for Mac OS X. Packages have become a known quantity for deploying software and a dependable way to put that software on the Macs that we use and manage. Besides installing packages by double-clicking on their icons, of course, packages do work with all the tools we've been talking about at conferences like this. And you tend to see a lot of the free tools used, especially in some sessions here, because they're free. And the Luggage is one of those free tools. So packages are great. You can use them in a lot of places. How do we create them? Well, this is a great time to be packaging Mac software because there's just so many options. There's GUI options and there's this kind of tool. However, some of the GUI options I think have drawbacks. I've never really liked the ones that I've tried out. So I think we can fix some of those problems with 1977 Unix technology. That's what this is all about. I won't feel bad if you want to walk out now. Although I did try to be specific about it in the session description. So how many of you have seen a tutorial or gone through this work to compile or install Unix software? Yeah, a lot of us. If you have, this looks familiar. Even though we've had 10 years of Mac OS X, some of you may still be wary of this kind of command line work. Some days I am too. Oh, no more command line stuff, please. Not really, I'm in the terminal all the time. So others of you may be bored because you're already using terminal or iTerm all day. You can log out of IRC now, all of you, because I'm not watching out for your good-natured heckling. So the luggage does require use of the terminal, the command line, and text files, and we just have to live with that and maybe embrace it. So why would we subject ourselves to this 1977 Unix technology in 2012? Why would we want to use the terminal, command lines, and text files? Over and over, I keep hearing people, why would I want to use Luggage? Why would I want to do this? Well, these are good questions. On the Mac, we have a lot of drag and drop application installs. We get new apps and updated versions frequently. If you're managing computers, you do want to have a quick turnaround to getting new software out to them. Packaging is drudgery. That means that a reproducible process involving automation and a reliable tool to do that work is a great asset. And if you can install your tools everywhere you need them without high or even any licensing costs, that's even better. Luggage fits that bill. We start with source files. We feed them through the Luggage process. That results in an installer package, which can optionally be wrapped in a disk image or zip file. Disk images are, of course, helpful for storing packages on non-Mac servers or disks. If a new version of those same files must be repackaged, we only need to insert the new or changed files into the process. With the Luggage, we can rebuild the package using the same set of definitions as before. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to the Luggage, just as with anything else. My favorite is that I can take input files, run them through that repeatable process, which sets up the working directory that is used and processed by PackageMaker as its source data, and that produces the output I want. Okay, maybe I lied. I think my favorite reason to use the Luggage is I don't have to use the GUI PackageMaker. It has just never worked the way I want it to. The Luggage excels with packaging drag and drop apps. While I haven't tried this, you should also be able to apply this to Mac App Store apps, which are themselves self-contained. And once you're set up, it takes one command to create a new package. It's a quick to repeat process, so you can do it as you make changes. You modify your process with command line arguments that branch if you want to, and if you'd like, you can then wire your package building commands up to a scheduler trigger, perhaps with LaunchD. The Luggage's data file is a text format which both computers and humans, with some training, can read. The makefile syntax used is open and understood by others. Maybe you'll be next. And of course, everybody loves to select their text editor of choice, right? That's a great thing. The format and process allow you to review your packaging code, either 6 months from now when you have to revisit for a new version of the software, or any other time in the future, or with your team if you have a group of people that are doing packaging together. We should all package together, right? And you can even share these with people across the internet. So there are people that have shared their recipes for Luggage to build certain apps. If you want to add version control, you can also create checkpoints that document the development history of your packages. That's a more advanced thing, but it is possible, and I'll lay it out there as an advantage. But there are disadvantages, of course. First, there's a learning curve. With the luggage, it can really help to learn how to use make because you're creating make files. Make is a developer tool. So I'm going to put on my inspirational speaker hat and say first, the Buffalo Sabres can make the NHL playoffs next year. And second, you can write make files. I never thought I'd be able to do this years ago. I didn't know why I'd want to do it, but I did. And I can do it. You can do it too. And there goes the hat. The luggage is also has a disadvantage that does not find the files that you need to install. It doesn't find them for you. If you don't know what needs to be installed with an application, or you don't know where it needs to be installed, you'll need to start with other tools that watch the file system as you're installing it or putting it on your system. You do have to keep Luggage up to date yourself as well. It's a command line tool. There's no built-in software update. There's no Sparkle. There's nothing that's built in like that. So if you do happen to know how to use version control tools like Git or Mercurial, those can help you keep the software up to date on your own. And when you're learning Luggage, you have to check a number of sources of information. Ultimately, it does pay back to go back to the source code of the luggage.make makefile, where pretty much all of the action happens. And I'm really hoping that from now on, you'll want to go back to the session video from today and the slides from this session, because I've tried to be compulsively thorough. Should you add version control, that puts another layer into your packaging process. It's a helpful layer, at least that's the way I found it, but there is some overhead, even if it's mental. But revision control can really help you remember what happened when and why you made certain changes in your make files or your scripts later on. So the luggage requires some setup. This is one of the other things that I hear people asking, like, how do I get it installed? What do I need? With Snow Leopard, we have to install Xcode 3. That's a prerequisite. With Lion, we can install Xcode 4 through 4.2, or thanks to the changes with Xcode 4.3, where the various tools have been split up, which is a blessing and a curse, we must get the auxiliary tools installer and the command line tools installer from the Apple developer site. In this case, we currently need to symlink package maker so that the luggage can find it. So there's a symlink here. That'll be in the slides that you can download. We'll eventually need some text editors to do fancier things with Luggage. You know, you can either use something in the GUI like BBEdit or something in your shell of choice like VI or Emacs or any of that. Then there's the Luggage itself. It's an open source software project hosted on the GitHub site. GitHub is a site for sharing software projects, and you can get there from this URL on screen. This is the direct URL for Luggage. If you haven't used GitHub before, it's pretty easy to just click on this zip button to download the software as a zip archive. Otherwise, if you do use version control, you can use clients like Git or Mercurial to download the actual repository that you can then keep up to date later. Once downloaded, you must install the Luggage. This command will do that. And it's actually twisting make, the developer tool behind the scenes, to install the files which we need to use make with later. So it's kind of meta. To handle my first example, it will go to in a moment, you must take one additional step to install a Ruby gem called Trollop. I don't use Ruby at all, but I know how to run this command. That's the extent of my Ruby. So let's make a package for fetch. How many of you have used fetch, the FTP program that's been around for as long as the Mac? All right, everybody's still raising their hands. That's good. Nowadays, it's a drag and drop install. So this is a perfect use case for Luggage, as I indicated before. From here, I'll be showing a couple of code examples. So I'll use the $ to represent the command prompt, if you're unfamiliar with that convention, and a / to continue long lines. So there's going to be some long lines. I'll have to warn you about that. In terminal, we'll change the directory to the documents folder. Then we'll run app-to-luggage.rb, which is the script that will help us out in this packaging task. So the creator of Luggage, Joe Block, figured that many people would want to create packages from Mac apps, the drag and drop style Mac apps. So this script is a shortcut to help out with that. It creates a makefile that lets you package those apps, and then I'm going to tell the script that I want to make the package with a package ID of fetch. The reverse domain that's listed here, com.fetch softworks, is one that will help us uniquely identify this package from others on your system. And then the app I will package is in the path /application/fetch.app. And the script will save what it does in the directory name given, and it's just fetch with some gibberish characters after it that I banged out so that I could test this multiple times. All of that captures the source files for fetch.app. So those become the ingredients for this. And the script creates a makefile, which is the recipe that we'll be able to reuse over and over again. We can keep that in our cookbook. The makefile recipe starts off by including luggage. Second, it sets up variables, including what will be in the package payload. And then then the makefile is created by a script here. So this is a little bit more complicated than what you would see if you were making your own, a little bit harder to read. But this last line is actually where it's going to pull fetch out and put it into the package. So this is where the 1977 technology comes in, make. With app-to-luggage, the script runs make for us. Later on, we'll see that we're going to have to run it manually. The result is that it will end up with fetch here in a folder. But if we wanted to run this ourselves, we would run sudo make pkg. We'd end up with a .package file. If we ran sudo make dmg ourselves, which we'll see later, we'll get fetch with a package wrapped in a disk image. So it can actually help automate that process. There's 2 steps in one. If I double click on that image, there would be a package in there. So we've now made our first makefile with app-to-luggage.rb. Any questions at this point? So a stunned silence. All right. You're stunned because you've made a package, right? You've seen this package get built. Kind of. There's no demo here. So let's delve into what makes a simple makefile for the luggage if we're going to make it ourselves. So copy the fetch app into the same folder where you will save your makefile. So you'd probably want to make a new folder for fetch like this. We then create an archive of the fetch app with tar using this command. We don't want any of the parent path information in the tar archive, and we want to use Apple's tar. We use tar here because it puts the entire application bundle, because fetch.app is actually a folder with a lot of folders and files underneath it. And it puts it all into a single file, and it preserves the file system information we may need on Mac OS X, if there's any in those source files. So we don't want to get scared off by this, because there are some alternatives to using tar that I'll talk about later, but this is the one that originally came along with the luggage. So we must then include the luggage makefile. The shared makefile includes definitions that we'll use and build upon later, and we'll use them either directly or as building blocks. So this is just like we saw in the automated example with app-to-luggage. Then we define some variables. We need a title, like we saw before, a reverse domain, and a payload. So right now everything's kind of blank and boilerplate. If we fill in those examples from fetch, we get this. We didn't see the unbz2 applications rule before, because app-to-luggage.rb handles things slightly differently. But because we archive fetch manually, this is the kind of rule that we would use to get that the data from that tar archive into our package. And then go back to the command line. Once we save that makefile and put it into the same directory with the fetch application archive in tar format, we can then run make pkg. We could also use make pkgls, which runs lsbom on the compiled package to list its contents. And make dmg compiles the package and wraps it in a disk image. By default, this is a UDZO formatted disk image, if you're aware of the different disk image formats. It is read-only. It's sized for the contents that are going to go into it, and then it's compressed with gzip level 9, which is the highest level of compression. This format is compatible with macOS 10 versions starting with 10.2, so it's going way back. Format's relatively obscure because of that, but it is highly compatible with every version of macOS 10 that we probably are going to deal with. This default compression helps save space, which can help if we want to store lots of installers in this format. You can try compressing the disk image more highly. We can do that by overriding a variable that we'll see later, or we could change other disk image format parameters, but this is the default, so we get a nice small disk image. Make zip then compiles the package and compresses it into a zip archive. With that, we have a number of different ways to wrap packages created by the Luggage. So it should suit your various needs for using them with a configuration management tool or archiving. As for the data size of the result, the disk image format normally compresses more highly. UDBZ oddly comes out to be the largest. This is if I overrode that package format. So I've seen this several times with disk images containing packages, and I've reproduced it manually from the command line while I was trying to do it myself without Luggage involved. So therefore, I can't recommend overriding the default disk image format that the Luggage uses for this particular purpose. So even though I've often seen UDBZ images out-compress the UDZO images for system images, if we were creating something with instaDMG or so on, I wouldn't recommend doing it here. I just stay with the Luggage default. Just wanted to mention that little tip. The actual output you create, though, should depend on your need. So you want to create a package or a disk image based on the deployment and configuration management systems you use. Whatever your system takes in, if it needs a package wrapped in a disk image, like Monkey does, then use that. If you're storing installers long-term, such as in some sort of definitive media library, if you're into ITIL things, consider that the default compressed disk images or zip archives are your best choice. Zip archives may be the smallest, but I do give the default disk image format the edge because you can always directly use it with systems like Monkey, and that can be a big benefit. So there are basics of creating your own makefile without app-to-luggage.rb. But we can go beyond that. Let's talk a little bit about makefiles. If you want to go further, a makefile consists of variables, rules, comments, and directives. You want to think of if statements for directives. We saw that there were some required variables, but there are many other optional ones that can help you create the packages that you need. The optional variables typically have default definitions, but they can be overridden to suit your purposes. So the big one that I tend to override is package version. It starts off as just being a date stamp. That's what the $ stamp is. So it'll come out to be, let's see, today is 2012, what is it, 0504. Oh, it's May the 4th be with you. Had to work that joke in somehow, right? Sorry, somebody on Twitter reminded me of it. The package format starts out as one compatible with macOS 10 version 10.4, so it'll work with anything after that. So I would not change this. If you need to create the newer flat package format introduced with 10.5 or Leopard, you might need to blaze your own trail a bit. I've had a few problems with that myself. You can override whether or not the installer works on only the root volume. That's the root only equals true. So by default, you can only install these packages on the root volume, but if you need to be able to switch disks, like if you were using them with instaDMG, you could override that. You can also override whether or not a restart is required. Right now, the default is that the Luggage will create packages that do not require a restart. So we've talked about the disk image formats just a few moments ago. This is where we can override the disk image format with DMG format code, and the UDZO format is documented in, and all the other formats for that matter, are documented in the HDI util man page if you want to read more about that. So it's HDI util. So make relies on dependencies here to do its work. So each dependency is a small piece loosely joined with the others. The locations in the system where you store your files are listed in the luggage.make file. And we've got ones like this. They carry a lowercase l underscore prefix. So anything that has an L underscore is a location that we're going to install something into, or potentially install something into. Here, the launch agents folder at the bottom depends upon the library and then root. So these locations are created for you when needed for your installer in the temporary directory that Luggage makes to build your installation package. So while these look like paths you'd see on a standard Mac OS X system, and that's the point, they don't represent anything back on the startup disk you're using with the Luggage. They're actually creating something in a temp directory so that Package Maker can use that. To install a single file into a location, we use a pack rule. These are like the unbz2 applications rule that we saw earlier with fetch, but app bundles in that case are a special case. There is a pack type rule like this for files that go into most common install locations. The % in the target after the dash and to the left of the colon represents the name of a file in the same folder as your makefile. If no file by that name exists, you will get an error when make tries to find the sources after the colon. So it needs the things that are after the colon to exist. So in this case, it needs the file represented by the %, and it needs library launch agents to exist. If it is not, any of those things are not present, the location rule will create it, or if it can. So these types of rules are typically added to your payload variable. Packages can then contain more than just a payload. They can include scripts and other resources. It's easy to create payload-free packages with the Luggage, so that you may end up using scripts or reusing existing scripts you already have in the package context much more frequently than you would have otherwise, because it just becomes handy to build them in if you want to. Packages you create for sysadmin use versus those for end users typically have different needs. Sysadmin deployment packages probably rely on payload and scripts more, and because they're typically meant to be run solely in the background. Packages aimed at end users, though, benefit from clear requirements checking, plus the welcome, README, and license files. You can create both kinds of these. You can create ones that, packages that are meant for background installs, and you can create them for end user installs as well. I've actually done more of the end user installs with the Luggage. Perhaps the best reference for how to add these scripts and other resources to the older style packages that Luggage creates, the non-flat packages, is this page from the maker of Iceberg and Packages. This is a very handy resource, and it is up on the website that I linked to earlier. So there are 3 text documents that you can add to installers we just spoke about. The welcome, README, and license files. They can be in any of these text formats depending on your need for text styles and images. But the file names are important, so you do need to get them right when you're putting them into your packages. Luggage can then add these text files to installers with the pack.en resource rule that adds the files into the en.lproj folder inside the package bundle. I find it important to test, and retest my installer scripts. So therefore, I have memorized this keyboard shortcut sequence that I use in the installer app, which opens up the installer log window and shows everything, not just errors. So it starts off by just showing errors, which I find less useful than showing everything. So this is one you'll probably want to memorize as well if you do any sort of packaging. The installation script is the first type of script that determines whether the package is eligible to install on your system. It's checking the overall system. You know, it would be checking for like system version and things like that. There has to be a corresponding installation Check.strings file, and you have to do some math to get the exit code of your installation check script to match up with the string that's in your installation Check.strings file. So let's see an example of that. So here's some Python code. I happen to like Python a lot. Does anybody else here use Python? No hands. Uh-oh. Oh, one hand. Thank you. You saved me. Well, anyway, this kind of reads like English anyway, so just pretend it's not Python. So I'm checking to see if the current platform for the system is greater than or equal to the minimum platform that I want to have for this install. And if I am, I'm exiting with success. Woohoo. And then otherwise, I'm going to exit with exit code 112, which will then correspond to 16 in the installation Check.strings file. So this is literally the only contents of that text file. 16 equals this computer must be running at least Mac OS 10, 10.5. Very exciting. Oh, question.
Can you generate your own error string dictionary?
Yes, this file is where you're putting that mapping. You're saying here's what the math for the exit code maps up to, and here's the custom error code. If you don't want to have a custom error message at all, there is a specific exit code that you can use that doesn't need to map up to anything. And that's described in the URL that I linked to 3 or 4 slides ago. Does that help? Okay. The VolumeCheck script runs for every mounted disk and finds the ones which are eligible for this particular install. So you may want to check to see whether, again, system version is a certain version on any particular install volume that's or any volume that's mounted on the current system. So again, this returns values which map to another .strings file, the VolumeCheck.strings file. And again, you have to do math. I don't know why they can't just map up. But the exit code -32 is the warning value to look up. So here's some Unix shell code. If you're more into shell scripting than the Python example I had before, which nobody was into. So we're checking a version number again. If we're succeeding, that's we're going to exit with exit code 0. Otherwise, we're going to exit with 48, and that will map up to something in a similar file. I'm not going to show an example of that file. So there are various scripts that we've just seen that run at different points in the installation process, right before the installation process. And there are some that run after we start clicking install. So these, they must have these particular names, but they can call scripts by other names if you want to embed more into your install. The post-flight script, which I've put in bold, is probably the one that you will use the most. I would caution you, though, against using, against taking any actions in any of these scripts that would affect the file system. That's really where the payload comes in. The payload of an installer is where you want to change the file system. So commands that affect the file system are ones like cp, mv, rm, and anything else that affects this file system, ln, you're probably going to want to try to avoid in these install scripts if at all possible. I'm really a purist on this. I know not everybody is. But I think that if you're going to change the file system, that's what the payload's for. So I'd encourage you to try to do that and avoid doing it in scripts. For one thing, it's really hard to track those kinds of changes because they don't end up in the receipts database. Anything that's in the payload ends up in the receipts database, and you can check it later. So here are some sample rules that could be added to your luggage payload variable to include the kinds of resources we just talked about. The installation check and the strings file that goes along with it, VolumeCheck and the strings file that goes along with it, the post-flight script, and a pre-upgrade script. Yes?
I have a question for where you were just before.
Sure.
I haven't done any imaging on OS 10 for a bit, but the receipts database is Is that still what's used right for privilege checks? When you did a check privileges from this utility, you would reference to
Check permissions?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know the current state of official documentation on that. The answer is somewhat complex, and I have a couple of blog articles about that that date back to about the Leopard timeframe. But I can't tell you what the current state is. But there are some things that are hard-coded into the disk utility binary. If you run strings on it, and you can see a list of receipts that it is checking. I believe now it might also be consulting some of the receipts in the database based on some.
File system changes in the scripts, they wouldn't get corrected with a permission.
Yes, because if you're making any file system change in a script, that's not something that would get recorded in the receipts. So that's another one of the reasons why I would want to do all of my file system modifications in the payload. So up to this point, we haven't used any directives or conditionals in our makefiles. One way you might want to use them is to add default preferences to an app package. So by default, we'll go back to fetch. The default here will be to build the fetch package, just like we did before. So maybe you want to add preferences that are pre-populated with a serial number and an organization. You could create that preference file and then conditionally add it with this addition. So adding the conditional here will succeed when the add press variable has been passed at the command line. So several conditionals exist in Make. I just happen to use if-def here. There are too many to really go into in an hour. But inside this if-def block, or if-defined, I have appended more to the existing payload variable. So this will add the specified preference file stored in the same directory as the make file to the package if this variable is defined. So how do I get it defined? Just like this. So normally I would be running sudo make pkg. If I want to put add prefs on this, I do sudo make pkg add prefs equals 1. So we'll go on to a case study. The Hazel preference pane from Noodlesoft is a good example of how we can install a preference pane. And think of that, and this is the kind of project that adds on top of the luggage and builds upon its features. So this example is posted on my Bitbucket account, so you can see that if you care to. One of the interesting things is that pref panes are like apps. They have executable code. They're often distributed with drag and drop installers. And they may have file system attributes that we want to preserve, just like the fetch, drag and drop install. So the luggage already handles apps, of course, but it doesn't handle preference panes yet. So after the boilerplate include and variables that we talked about later, the things that we have to have at the top of every makefile for the luggage, we'll add the preference pane location to our makefile. It depends upon luggage's existing library location. Again, it's an L underscore location. And that's in the file system's local domain. When this is called, it will set up the preference panes path in the luggage's working directory. So all this is just to create that preference panes folder in the work directory, which is work underscore D. After that, this recipe calls for ingredients, or in this case, the Hazel application bundle. Luggage doesn't have an existing way to do this for preference panes, but because it already supports applications in at least 4 different ways now, I can show you the 3 that I got working for preference panes. So let's copy this first. We've seen unbz2 applications talked about before. Here is what it actually looks like in the luggage.make makefile. All right, it's got the % signs and everything. Let's modify it. So here I've edited the unbz2 rule for applications to make a new rule for preference panes. The changes are highlighted. There weren't that many. So instead of applications, I'm doing preference panes, and I'm setting up all of the path information. Starting to make some sense? Get a few nods. That's good. You're learning make. You're surprised, aren't you? I was too. We can also package software that's in the same folder as the make file. If we just took the preference pane and dragged it into the same folder, we could use this rule. So this is a relatively new feature of Luggage that works for applications. It doesn't require you to create zip or tar archives first. Just copy the application into that folder. So that's kind of friendly. And I wish this had been there when I started with make. Somebody clever came up with it. So let's modify that. Let's create a rule that changes that and makes it suitable for preference panes. Did everybody see that? I went pretty quick on it. Happy? Okay. Now, Luggage has support for pulling apps from /applications as well. If we had already put the application in and dragged and dropped it into our applications folder, Luggage could pull right from that and use that as the data source. So, and again, that's something that's relatively new. We can copy and edit this rule as well to get a third way that we can install install preference panes. So here are the changes made to pull preference panes from the local domain right from where we would normally install them on a system for all users. Is this making sense? I'm doing some repetition here. All right, more nods. That's awesome. Woohoo. You're learning make. You're surprised, aren't you? You're all going to go home and make things. Such a generic name. Couldn't they have come up with something else? But it was 77. You could. What was that?
Every character counts in 77.
Yes, it did. Every character did count. So. Yes. So you can keep changes or additions that you make local to your own site. I mean, if you were creating some preference panes rules like this, you could create those and just use them locally, at your university, your company, your consulting firm, whatever. But this is a kind of thing that might be useful for other people. It might have some value to others. So you could consider contributing back to the project. That's a bigger topic, but I do want to mention that it's possible, and that's one of the reasons why things like some of the rules we just edited exist, because people said, I don't want to make tar files all the time. So they created other kinds of rules that would help out. So these kinds of changes could get contributed back. So let's go on to another case study. Let's do something tricky, like install a Python module. This is probably a bad example now for this room, because I know that there's only one other person in the room that likes Python. So you're just going to have to bear with me. We're going to install it with a payload-free package. Does anybody know what a payload-free package is? Right. There's no payload in it. There's no application. There's no no other files that we're going to modify in the file system. It's just scripts. So these are my ringers in the front. Hi guys. So you can see this example here. It has the fanciful name Dulwich. Does anybody know what Dulwich comes from? You're not Python people, so you may not know Monty Python and the reference to Dulwich. I don't even really know much about Python, but I read the Wikipedia article about it. So we may not want to wrap the actual Python module up in the package payload, because that's a couple of files. It's going to be a lot of rules to manage. This is one case where I'll bend my rule about modifying the file system in the installer or in the installer scripts rather than the payload, because Python has a command called easy install, which is one of the reasons why I like Python. It is easy to install other modules. You just run easy install to update or add new modules into your system. So we need to have the package name, Dulwich in this case, and then we can also specify exact or relative versions. So I'm going to say equals 0.8, and we normally run easy install with sudo, but if we run this command in an installer, the installer can prompt for its own authorization, because we've all seen that, where the authorization services dialog pops up. You fill in your credentials, and the installer is authorized to touch more of the file system than it would have been able to do otherwise. So we really just need to have a command like this in an installer script if we wanted install this module. Turns out that all the pieces of information, the name of the package and the version, are the same kinds of things that we need for luggage in a makefile. So in this case, the package version is specified as 0.8. So we're putting in there and overriding the default package underscore version that I talked about before when I had the horrible May the 4th joke that we've all heard so many times on the internet in the last couple of years. Behind the scenes, though, Luggage will insert these variables into the info.plist file in the package bundle. So who has looked at an info plist file before? There's a lot of hands here. Yeah. These buggers are all over Mac OS X, aren't they? Here's one from my example installer. So it's in the contents folder of the installer. You can see that's actually a dulwich.package. And it's an info plist. It looks like this when you open it up in Property List Editor, which, if you haven't noticed, doesn't exist as a standalone application anymore with Xcode 4.3. Glad you're all getting your evaluations right now. Make sure I get all 5s or all 1s. I don't want anything in between. I'm just kidding on that. I'll take whatever I can get. So fortunately, you can also use other tools besides Property List Editor to read these, including some tools that work in scripts. The first set of lines in black gets the name of the Python module that we want to get. We get it out of the info plist from the installer package itself. So luckily for this room, this is shell scripting and not Python. So this hopefully will make some sense to you. I didn't ask if you all did shell scripting. I guess I should have done that. I don't want to have you raise your hands too many times. So yes, you do tire easily, I know. So the second set of dark lines here gets the version, and then I use that with easy install. We put it all together with easy install, and we're running easy install with package module equals package version. It looks a lot like that dulwich equals 0.08 command that I had before. And then the script exits. One of the very important thing about installer scripts is if you don't do anything else, have them exit 0. Because if there's any other failure code, bad things can happen. You'll really want to see that Command L, Command 3 thing to see what happens. So this is the payload-free package that pulls down and installs a specific version of a Python module. And it does it all with this post-flight script. All right? You're all excited about this, I can tell. So let's move on to an even crazier application, the kind that we all have to deal with, right? So Identity Finder is an example of a complex application that you might be called on to package. It's an application that can scan a system for private information like social security numbers and financial accounts. There's a standalone version as well as an enterprise version. So the basic app is a drag and drop install that anyone can download because there is a consumer version. However, there is an enterprise version that reports back to the console, server console. So the consumer app, and the enterprise client are the same. So the vendor supplies a deployment guide to turn one into the other. They also supply scripts to build an installer for deployments from the drag and drop install of the app bundle on a disk image. Sound familiar? We've just been talking about this. We can do this. The installer that they build takes some actions in the file system in the installer scripts. I don't like that. So rather than, they just don't put that in the payload. So it's their choice. But we can change that. We want to have things in the payload so we can check receipts and so on and so forth, all the things that are good about having files in payload. So the application gets installed normally to /applications. The vendor's installer scripts then copy files out of the app bundle, like in post-flight and post-install and things like that. They copy these files out of the app bundle and into the application support file after the app bundle has been installed. So we can put those into payload. There are also some launchd tasks that are installed and run by their package scripts. And for the enterprise deployment of this particular product, you'll want to have some sort of initial configuration to connect with the console server. That server expects clients with a license file, and SSL connections that it creates depend upon an anchor certificate of authority cert placed in a specific file system location, not ones that you may have already deployed and trusted in your keychains. They want it in the file system. So there's 3 files here that we want to deploy: an initial configuration file, a license file, and an anchor CA certificate that is the one used to sign the server's certificate. Okay? So these are things we might have to do in the real world. So to handle all of this, we start by creating a location for inside the application support folder. This will be a subfolder of the application support folder in the local domain. So we're just adding on to something that the Luggage already knows about. It already has a definition for the application support folder. And then this is where we go off the rails a little bit because I started with Luggage a long time ago, which is maybe a year or 2 now. It's internet speed. So assume that the application bundle is in a tar archive, because that was all I could do at the time. This is before Luggage handled anything else. So there are pieces in that application bundle that I want to pull back out to add into the payload, into other locations. So steps involving this are not necessary if you start with some of the newer rules with Luggage, like the ones we saw with Hazel. Those are rules that don't require tar, but I started with this when we needed tar. So this is a small rule. This force rule is, I guess it goes along with May the 4th, but didn't even think that joke was going to work out again. But the force rule is one that I picked up while reading about Make while developing this particular installer. And if this appears to the right of a colon in any rule, the Make will run that rule no matter what, even if the other prerequisites don't exist. So these variables key off some standard Luggage variables and will be used in subsequent rules. So app name is a standard Luggage variable, and we're just building upon it and getting the name of the tar archive. So I wanted the version of the package to match the version of Identity Finder. I get that from the info plist and pull that out of the tar archive, and then read the version number with plist_buddy. So we did this before with the Python module, as you may recall. So really just getting the version number of the app. Then there are some additional files from Identity Finder's app bundle that are copied elsewhere with scripts to the vendor's package, in the vendor's package rather. To put them in our package, in the payload, I made a list of them. These are all the files I want to get. And then I extract them into the same directory as the makefile with a for loop. So this is just a complicated way of getting files back out of the tar archive after I put the app into a tar archive. So I'm creating work for myself, and we all love that, right? To get the files extracted from the archive, I have to add them to the payload variable. So I'm extracting the version, that's the plist, where I'm extracting the info plist and getting the version number, and I'm extracting items. So these things may not really look like payload, but payload is where the actual action in Luggage happens. So that's where I'm saying I need this to actually take place. So there are multiple items that are then installed into the application support folder, so I generalize the rule for that. Highlight that. Generalize it with the % signs. The text where the % signs are will be inserted where the $ left angle bracket is. So go from whatever's in the % sign space will actually get inserted down in subsequent lines into where the $ and the bracket up here. I don't understand that part. I just, read part of the O'Reilly book. You can do that too. It's available. So, and then this is another tricky thing. This is the subst or substitution call. So this is similar to something that you might do in awk or Excel, and I think FileMaker even has a call like this, if you're familiar with that. I got a nod, thank you. I didn't remember FileMaker all that well. So, huh?
Or like the app.
Oh, yeah. So if the text in the $ angle bracket variable contains type, it will be replaced with the text between the commas. So a couple of commas with nothing between them. So I'm effectively deleting some text from that variable. And why do I do this? Well, because I'm slightly crazy. I do this really because for the installer, I wanted to build versions that would connect to a test server and another one that would connect to a production server. And there were different ingredient files for the test server and the production server. So the test server has a prefix, its files have a prefix in the file system. And we'll see that in a moment. So I use that trick again here to copy the executables that I extracted from the app bundle into the tar archive. I needed that special rule for them because their mode is different. It's 755. The others have a different mode. These are executables. So once more here, I override the pack rule, pack library preferences. I override that rule that goes by the same name in luggage.make. And it's because I'm making a change. I'm using this subst call, which the normal one from Luggage does not do. They don't, nobody thought you would be doing something where you'd have test and production preferences. So the subst calls are related to how make is run. So if this is called with type equals test, that type variable contains test, and test will be removed from the file names. So these two files, these two plists, actually exist in my folder where the makefile is, and they can exist there at the same time because they have different names. I'm just stripping one when I run make with type equals test. The last of the special rules for this makefile installs the IDF application. I created this rule rather than using the standard pack rule because the app has spaces in its name. Treat spaces in names in makefiles as if they are a swarm of bees. Avoid them. This is one of the reasons why I suggest the use of app-to-luggage.rb for packaging apps. It handles the spaces for you in much the same way that this does. So these additional rules are then added to the payload. Notice that the last one doesn't have a backslash, because you don't want a backslash because you don't want to have a continuation character. I mess that up every once in a while in my make files, and then I have to figure out why, and I'd like to save you that trouble. All right, and then for the test production switch, we need a directive. The if equals block checks to see if the type variable contains test. Right here. And if the equals block, in the if equals block, some variables are assigned and override the existing rules. A special note, I use the colon equals operator to allow for existing variables to be expanded first. So then this is the basic payload to build the installer for this complex application, putting all of its relevant resources into their locations in the installer payload. Assuming that there are no major changes to the IDF software, each revision of the app takes a minute or less to rebuild the package. That's it. So I've got the recipe, I just keep repeating it every time, adding in the new ingredients. So it's a bunch of work up front, but it's somewhat fun work once you figure it out. And it takes you a few installers. So some lessons. We can't have a presentation here without bringing up Greg, so I wanted to mention he brought Package Apocalypse upon us. He copyrighted it on IRC the other day. We also need to use sudo with the various make commands, or you'll get an error like this. And your mileage may vary with the 10.5 style flat packages, so I would suggest not overriding those. The package target OS equals 10.5. I would just leave it at 10.4 the way it comes in Luggage Make.
Or just have a mass 10.5 exodus across your entire domain.
Right. So if you need more assistance, there is a Google group dedicated to the luggage. It's low volume, at least before today, and it's friendly. So please feel free to take part in this group if you are one of those people who has a Google account. So thank you for your time and attention this morning. I really do hope this talk was helpful. And if you want to learn more, there are some more resources you can turn to. These links are also up on the URL I'll show in a moment. But we have very little time for questions at this point, I think. But let's ask any you have. Please, any. Or did I explain things so well? Yes.
So is this just, all right, so will this install package or just build them for
We are just creating install packages. That's all the Luggage does. It can optionally wrap them in images or zip archives afterwards, but the only thing that it does is build install packages. So, but it does it very well and repeatably and has all these advantages that were outlined. So, did I answer your question? Okay. Yes?
In the identity finder case study, can you go a little more into the process of reverse engineering? I presume what you did is you took the vendor's installation and figured out exactly all the files that needed and scripts that needed to go wherever they needed to go, and then you went through the process that you just detailed. Can you go into the detective work?
Sure. Sure. So the question was what detective work was done to reverse engineer the installation for Identity Finder. They provide scripts to turn the drag and drop installer into a package. So I took those scripts, read through them. They're all shell scripts. And all told, it was probably it was a couple hundred lines of shell scripting, strangely enough. And I replaced that with about 150 lines of make. The scripts mostly mostly indicated what files were being copied where. I kept track of those scripts over time. I'm into version control, so I would take the earliest versions of the scripts that I had, and I would check them into a version control repository and keep using that to find the differences as new versions would come out, because they would release them from time to time. And then I would be able to focus on specific areas of change to see, oh, what files are they copying where in this new revision. Does that help?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a solved problem or not, but how would you go about repackaging, say, an Adobe Reader?
I probably would not. I probably would not. This is a tool mostly designed for repackaging smaller self-contained apps. You can certainly do more complicated things like I did with Identity Finder, but when you get into a even more complicated application, like the things from Adobe, some of their software now comes with better packages, and in general, the trend I think has been to get better. But I have not been called upon to do any repackaging for those apps, and my experience is, at least mostly with the Flash installer, is that it does have a reasonably good package. I'm not sure about Adobe Reader itself, but if a vendor provides a reasonable package, I don't really see a reason to repackage. That's my thought. But if you know where the files need to go, you could certainly use Luggage to rebuild a package and make something that's your own. Are there any other questions? I'm going to wait for the very awkward long silence. Yes?
Okay, so sometimes if we have changes where we want to push a change out to the machine, it'd be nice to send it as a package and have it update behind the scenes. So is there a way to do that without letting the user know that?
Well, that's beyond the scope of the Luggage. The Luggage would certainly let you create the package, but it would really be up to whatever system you're using to push packages out, and that's where you'd have to look at the commercial and free tools like ARD, Monkey, FileWave, Casper, and things like that. This feeds into those systems. So this doesn't help. I mean, there's no run this with a silent flag or anything else like this. There's no deployment tool that you get out of Luggage. This is a purpose-built tool just for creating the package that you would reuse with another tool.
We have plist or MCX updates. I could build a package out of this that would then run on the other end where I could make it apply my plist.
Yes, you could certainly distribute plists if you wanted to. You have to decide in your organization or for your environment whether packaging plists and distributing them in an installer is a better way to get that preference information out rather than using something like a directory service with MCX or profiles or any other equivalent tool. Does that answer your question? And for the recording, the question was, how can you deploy the packages with this without the user seeing them? Is that a good paraphrase? Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank you for coming in. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. There's not much left. And please package things. All right.